Good morning. I'm sitting here thinking, while I'm drinking my matcha, about the history of the region of Israel and Palestine and all those places prior to Christ showing up, before the Messiah arrived. And I was thinking about the culture and the history because I'm a little bit of a historian and like to do my due diligence and research because I'm a professional pattern finder, if you will, to help people process and heal from their family line, lineage, epigenetic pain points, etc., as well as an intuitive and other things. So because I find it so fascinating to connect the past to the present and to show people why things persist versus living a heaven on earth experience that we can all have, it was this moment this morning I was thinking about the history of the region of the area and what was going on politically, what was going on with the people, where Christ was going to, show up for the people. So back then, in that timeline, pre-Christ, we had the Roman occupation, right? We also had heavy taxation, there was military policing areas and walking on the streets with people, right? Can you imagine? And we had the Pharisees and we had the Sadducees. Who am I forgetting? Oh, of course, then we had the Essenes, which were a totally different sect. So the Pharisees being all legal-based in their courts and their orders, and the Sadducees being like these priests and aristocrats that were connected to the Roman elite so that they could maintain their hierarchy and power, consider it today's 1% kind of thing. And then we had the zealots who were the extremists and who were the ones that were doing like the random acts of violence in order to make a point of their religious views. And then the people were poor and oppressed and could barely feed their families, if at all. And their harvests or their lands were taxed to such extremity that they had to share and kind of live in a commune kind of situation in order just to have daily sustenance and such. And some were, crafters. I think of Christ being a craftsman himself, or a carpenter as they call him. So that was one of the other things that people did, in addition to making cloth and clothing and farming. But there was also this undercurrent of all the prophecies that had been set prior around Christ's coming for the people, right? Like that's even why John the Baptist showed up, was to get people excited about Christ showing up in the world. So there was like that apocalyptic hope in that timeline. Oh, and I can't forget about Herod the Great. Oh boy, I drink my tea for that one. So, he was the king of the time. He's the one that was responsible for building the second temple. What else was going on? Hellenization. The Greek influence or the Jewish influence and the division, the line between, all Jewish people needing to adopt the Greek practices, not only from ideology, but also religion. The temple corruption. There was also that Maccabee revolt around that same timeline that Christ came into the picture. Any final thoughts? Just in general, think of all the uprisings that happened before then and how the people got oppressed further back. So people were in a desperate, dire place. Things were awful. I remember reading a particular biblical story about a widow and her having to give everything she had and was expected to donate her last coin. So I forget which story this is. I'll have to go back and reference it later. I'll drop it in the comments. And the reaction that people had around for her already being so unfortunate in the situation that she was in and was expected like her last bit of anything to be given. So it just kind of set the tone for what was going on at the time. But I bring all of this up because, I personally feel like we're in the second coming of Christ with a lot of biblical prophecy, astrological confirmation, even prophecy in other cultures as well, too. Whether we look at the Bhagavad Gita or if we're looking at, the Hopi indigenous prophecies, the blue and the red star Kachina, and I can think of like 7 others. But the point is, we're at this really pivotal time where humanity's consciousness is supposed to evolve. And Christ saying, we're supposed to do greater works than him, means that we were supposed to pay attention to what his works were to be able to do that. And how can we learn what his works were if people don't see that they can recreate them now? So he healed people, right? He was known for this like magical, miraculous, bringing like Lazarus back from the dead, having the blind see, having people come to walk. And if we take that just as metaphor, people might not understand what Christ's real works were. We have to look at it through the lens of quantum mechanics of what was possible. So if we look and we interpret Christ's teachings to perform greater works than he was able to do what was seemingly impossible, right? So to make the blind see meant that he had some kind of relation to the environment, to the reality that most people didn't know how to access. And if he could make the lame walk as well, that he was able to put things into motion or to an action that others hadn't considered how to do. So looking at quantum mechanics, we understand that our thought plus a feeling or a sensory experience in our body or an emotion equals an opportunity that gets brought to light that we can either act on, and then it gets realized to what it is, or if not acted on, then we share it and it comes to fruition. So some might call this like the recipe for manifestation. In Christian senses, we see that through prayer when people are at church and they put a prayer together and they're all thinking the same thought together and they're sharing it. And then maybe there's singing or hymns or, the piano in the background that's creating the sensory experience in the body. And then we have everybody that's in agreement with this thing. And so an opportunity comes, we're sharing it, right? So it's not just the action part, but sharing it makes it manifest. And then it goes out into the field and then it influences those that are involved in that. So that's one example, right? But that's coming from people wanting to change the circumstances and the outcome. So maybe somebody's got cancer and they, don't want that person to die. And so they put up the prayer requests for people that have cancer in order for them to be reversed. And I understand, I have had many family members that have cancer. But have they ever once thought to ask themselves, why do they have cancer? What is it that they're thinking? What is it that they're feeling? What is it that they're doing on a regular basis that would manifest cancer in their bodies? And that's the really cool thing about what Christ did before he healed people versus us just praying for people. As an example, as he would say to them, do you believe in me? Do you believe in my Father? And what have you learned from your affliction or from your illness? Because most of the people that he was performing these miracles for had a long time suffering affliction of some sort that was related to the body. And if they didn't answer those correctly, he didn't heal them. But if if it got a yes, that they believed in him and his Father, means that they were in agreement with the code that he was going to be changing in reality, right? And then they also when it could recognize the good or the positive attributes or positive consequences that came from, the materially defect circumstances or the pain points, the highlight reel, if you will, from whatever their grievances were, whether they were blind or whether they couldn't walk, or the woman that bled for 12 years, right? It was her belief that changed everything. So he made sure that people knew the value of their suffering before he healed them. And that means that even all suffering has value. And so thinking about that in this situation, we don't want to necessarily instantly heal or fix or solve things for people. That would be like an enabling parent. If our kids didn't learn their consequences for the choices and decisions they made, why would we remove the consequences? So when we think of God as this optimizing parent program, then we can understand and make sense of the suffering in the world is not only for our soul growth and our learning, but it's also for us to achieve these certain skill sets and characteristics and developmental qualities as a consciousness, as a soul, that are going to be used for optimization, for good, for healing. And so if we're supposed to do greater works than Christ, then we not only have to be like Christ, quite literally, we have to follow what he said and apply it just like you would as a teacher and a student. We put it into action to make it real. So what did Christ do? He offered another alternative viewpoint during the time of absolute outrage where the people were completely oppressed and there was there was like no hope for these people, is what it appeared to be. Like the poorest of the poor and the richest of the rich. We're going to call that super extreme. And don't we see that today? Aren't we seeing what Christ walked into today in our very moment? So wouldn't it be appropriate for him to return right now? And there are those that think he'll be physically returning. But for me, I think to do greater works than him, then that means that we have to activate the qualities that he had within us and bring them to light. For us to do greater works than him wouldn't be calling him back. It would be activating what he activated in the masses, meaning a huge awakening of people who recognize that their thoughts create their reality through how they're feeling subconsciously, which then manifests as their experience. And if it's negative, then that just means that's the architecture of your mind. And it can be changed. And if it's positive, that can be changed. So Christ's second coming is really about us recognizing we are part of what's happening, and that we are creating what's happening from what we think, what we believe, what we feel, and how we act and how we operate. So in order to do Christ justice by allowing him to return through us, then we have to take personal accountability for any grievances we're holding on to. We have to become humble. We have to forgive others. If he was willing to forgive others, right? We have to be able to walk our talk and show up. We have to be able to be radical in the way that we address things and not let conventional worldly things that they speak about so much in the canonized text affect us, like the 7 deadly sins: greed, lust, wrath, sloth, pride, etc. All those things. We have to be willing to do what's right, what's righteous, but not from a place of ego, but from truly what's good for everyone else and good for me. That's what we're being called to do. And that's what we're going to see when it comes to doing greater works than Christ, is where we're able to forgive our enemies, but not by tolerance, not by permittance, but by setting fucking badass boundaries, by saying no to the things that aren't okay, and doing it in a unified voice, doing it in our immediate, intimate environment, so that when we break the family first patterns with our parents and our children and our aunts and our uncles and everyone else, when we recognize that we have value and we have worth, and that what we think and feel is important, we set the tone for everybody else that's around us to do the same. And so when Christ was like, that is not okay, then everybody else was like, whoa, we can actually say that. We can actually do that. We can actually think that way. He essentially gave people subconscious permission to do what they felt was called upon them in their heart. He had people use their discernment, mixing their feeling, their intuition, their intuitive nature with logic, and speak on it and act on it. And in that, he created a congruency where people weren't having these cognitive dissonance moments where they knew one thing was wrong, but they had to go along with it anyway because society said so. He was like, no, that's not how we do this. So if we think about the palpable time where things were absolutely outrageous before he came into being, we're at a very similar point. And if we look at all the prophetic things and all of the signs and symbols that we see throughout the world and the planet, whether that be through just the text itself or the stars in the sky, it's time for us to embody the Christ within and to do greater works than him. So that means we got to call out the bullshit that we see, and that we have to do it in our personal environments first, so that we do it enough that it ripples out to the global scale. Our power is in numbers. Our power is together collectively. And that all comes to being when we focus on our empowerment individually. So thanks for listening. Just my thoughts this morning while I was drinking my tea.